Talking about Amazon is going after 3 or 4 people because they think that they might have been not gotten as much money as they should have gotten on a transaction.
Here's this family that Amazon wants to accuse of a crime. I'm going to take their money so they can't feed their kids. I'm going to destroy them publicly. I'm going to raid their home and terrify them. I felt like we were fugitives, but I also needed to be out of our house because after they took the money, then they raided our house. The FBI raided our house, and that was a horrifying experience.
The fact that when you started and they threatened you with saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this, it's witness tamper, it could be possible, don't name names, what did you think?
And I mean, I was kind of like, you can't tell me to shut down my TikTok. And I am not saying anything that is secret, that is wrong. I'm telling the truth.
All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Hey, don't forget to hit the follow button on this, subscribe, share, like this thing out. It helps the show. Folks, I've got a real warrior with me today. And when I'm saying warrior, I'm talking about Amy Nelson and her family went to what I would call war with the second richest man in the world and the Department of Justice. And it's a crazy story. They had their accounts seized. They had to move all over the place. Their home was raided. A true nightmare. But the interesting part of all this is they won. And I think a lot of it had to do with how Amy decided to deal with this situation and how she came about. And I told her when we were talking earlier, it really reminded me, and Amy spoke at our white collar support group as a speaker, and it really reminded me of my wife and her, how she went through it. That warrior mentality and not giving up and keep step and finding a solution. And we have 3 daughters. Amy has 4 daughters, and just the role model that my wife played, that Amy played for those kids, seeing, what it means to be resilient and looks to be an impossible situation. I've been really excited about interviewing Amy because of that, because I've always, everybody listens to the show, if you've heard me say, when somebody goes through a federal investigation, you get indicted, prison, the whole family goes through it, and how you lean on each other and how you get through that is always how you make it. And Amy's, she's got a story about that. I want to tell you a little bit about Amy. Amy, in her own right, I mean, we're talking about her being a criminal legal advocate and justice reform, but before all that, she is a very accomplished person. And just to tell you a little bit about her, she's the founder of Riveter. It's a venture-backed company launched in Seattle in 2017. The Riveter launched as a co-working and community startup and pivoted during the pandemic to build a career and media platform for millennial and Gen X women, providing the courses and tools needed to build the work life they want with thought leadership. She's a graduate of Emory University. She also is a graduate of NYU School of Law. Amy previously wrote a column for Forbes, hosted an iHeartRadio podcast, obviously practiced law. Like I said, she's the mother of 4 daughters that are 10, 8, 7, and 5. In addition to raising $30 million in venture capital to grow Riveter, which is no easy task of anybody who's ever tried to raise money, Amy has been published broadly, including in outlets of Newsweek, The Today Show, BuzzFeed, The Washington Post, Seattle Times, and she's spoken across the world on many stages, including Fortune's Most Powerful Women. And when you follow her, and a lot of people do, she's got a community of over 500,000 people on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and she's a great voice for what's going on in the world of criminal justice and what people don't know that they need to know. And she says it with such clarity. And I think that's why she has so many followers, because she's got so much passion and she's so, you can feel it when she talks. I can't wait to jump into this, but before we do, I want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple weekends walking car lots, looking for a car, then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. That's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Amy Nelson, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Brent.
So one of the things that I was thinking because, you know, looking at all the different things that you've done and the interviews, and you have, before any of this happened, a very accomplished career of doing a lot of different things. You were in politics, you were an attorney, you were, a founder, CEO. You did all these things, and you're a mom. You know, you wrap it all up. It makes you ask the question: Were you raised that way? Were you like, was Amy Nelson as a kid like just a warrior kid, just looking to take on the next thing? What was going on with you?
I have high energy. My mother was a school teacher, and she wondered if I had ADD as a child. I was always on the go, but decided I didn't. But I mean, I've always kind of just wanted to take on big problems and solve them. And I was raised in a family where sports were a big part of it, and learning to win and learning to lose. But playing.
Did you play sports?
I did.
Yeah,
I played all the sports when I was little, and then in high school had narrowed it down to water polo and swimming.
Wow.
And 3 of my girls are now competitive swimmers, all before the age of 10, which is really fun. But I mean, I think,
I know that world, that in that time frame too. You go to these swim meets and you sit there and you sit there and you sit there all day long with a whole host of people that are doing the same thing, and then your kid swims for like 30 seconds.
I know my husband does not know the swim world. He's a college ice hockey player, and he's like, "Wait, we are here for 8 hours.
Yeah,
and swim for a total of 15 minutes." It doesn't make sense.
But it's great.
Yeah, it is great. But yeah, no, I mean, I think I obviously, I had the mentality that I thought I would make a good litigator, which means I like to fight. But yeah, I've also always been involved in politics. And I think from a young age, I understood that there were a lot of people in the world who needed people to help them get through things and advocate for change. And I was lucky enough to work in international politics across the world. My first job after college was for President Carter at his Carter Center, and I worked on elections and anti-corruption efforts in Jamaica and Ethiopia and places around the world.
Well, I was curious about, because I read all that, and did you run across, and I think, are we both political science majors? Yeah. So, I mean, you read in there's constitutional law and all that, but when you started practicing law, did you run into anything that would be similar to, of people that you were helping in the world of law, that was anything that you ran into personally that that became part of your overall, fight?
Well, it is actually interesting, because there are days, I mean, I would not wish what I've been through on anybody, but there are days I'm kind of like, it's so wild that I feel like so much of what I've done in my life prepared me to try to help my husband fight this, because I was a litigator. I worked for a big law firm in New York when I got out of law school, and it was a financial crisis. And we represented one of the major credit rating agencies. And it was a topsy-turvy, terrifying time. And a lot of people in the financial world were very afraid of going to prison, of, the SEC investigations and the DOJ investigations. And I worked on those. And one of the things I ultimately did was, dive into very complicated facts, review a lot of documents, and then interview a lot of quantitative analysts and talk to them. And, it was a fascinating moment, because a lot of the analysts had a hard time talking to the older male partners who they were intimidated by, but they would all talk to me. And so I ended up, that was my role, like within the firm, going, to London and New York and DC and talking to these analysts who were very afraid. And, diving deep into facts and figuring out how to tell the story to Congress
Right.
in litigation. And that became incredibly important, I think, to helping my husband fight Amazon and the DOJ.
Yeah, no, I think it was, and it, I- I think one of the things that's so interesting about your story is that when you get hunted down by the DOJ, and then on top of that, you've got the second richest man in the world that is part of this fight. Um, you have, and you mentioned this before, before we got on, that there's three things that you can do, because a lot of people say fight or flight, and then you can also get paralyzed. And um, I think it's really courageous when somebody fights, because there's so many things when you're fighting something that we're talking about, Amy. You're fighting things that you're not. They're the unknowns. And so those are the scariest things to fight against, because when you know what something is, then you're tasking yourself that okay, I'm checking that box. I'm checking that box. When you're fighting the way that you had to fight, you are jumping into the arena and not knowing what's jumping out of that cage to get you. And that's the thing that keeps people from doing that. That's what, but one of the things I think you and I were talking about is that if you don't do that, the feeling of out of control, no control for people who are used to having control is almost worse than jumping into the unknown and not knowing what's coming out of the cage.
Yeah, I think, when my husband was accused of a crime, he felt he hadn't done anything, and he was ultimately never charged. And one of the things that kind of, I think, set the level for how we fought was that if you don't know DOJ investigations, a lot of investigations, they'll have one main target, and then they'll go after people under the target to flip on the target. And that's how they do it. And then they get everybody to plead.
Chapter and verse.
Yeah, they don't have to go to trial. Like, this is the playbook. And my husband was not the top target of the DOJ investigation. And so in order for him to plead, he would have had to point the finger at somebody who was innocent as well. And my husband did not have that in his bones to do it. And so there was never an option. We had to fight. And then if that, that's the
which is also courageous, by the way. So many people, and it's not like it can happen. It does happen. They can go to somebody and say, if you don't do this, and if you don't say this way, we're going to indict you. And it's a frightening thing for family and friends. You feel like you're isolated, but they do in certain situations isolate you from being able to, and if you talk to certain people, they'll accuse you of witness tampering when they can talk to anybody and everybody in the world,
including the press.
Right.
And I would argue, and people might say I'm crazy for saying this, but like, it is criminal to do that. It is criminal to put people into a vice so that they feel that they have to lie to say other people committed crimes who didn't. It's also just, this is a very simplistic thing to say. It's also just dumb. Like, that is the dumbest thing in the world to say a quote justice system where that's what you're doing. That's not justice. And every prosecutor knows that's not
right.
Justice.
Yeah.
So why are we doing it?
Well, I was shocked by the amount of weight that came down on you guys for the type of action this was. From what I understand, your husband was working for Amazon, but he had the right and the ability through the contract to do other things outside of that. But it looked like it was mostly him. He signed a contract, and this was real estate. And I'm sure Amazon has all kinds of deals that they do in real estate. And were you thinking, like, was it the first time that your husband had worked for a company that big? Like, were you, because you had kind of worked in the corporate world and big law firms, was that new to you and Carl, or was that kind of where he had been in his work environment and it was just normal for him to work for one of the biggest companies in the world?
No, that was the first time he'd worked for one of the biggest companies in the world. But Amazon is also an interesting beast, because when my husband joined in 2012, he joined Amazon Web Services, which is the subsidiary of Amazon that builds the cloud. And although it was 2012, when he joined AWS, it was so much smaller than Amazon. It was like 5,000 people. So it was actually a smaller company. And
which sounds huge. 5,000 people.
Amazon size, right?
Yeah.
at the time that he joined AWS, he had Amazon's original employment contract, which was a startup employment contract. And I'm a startup founder, and I had read his contract, and I was like, that tracks. How it reads tracks, because Jeff Bezos has multiple companies, does a bunch of different things. They all do business with each other. And the contract that Jeff Bezos wrote was like, you work for me, but there's a section that like carves out your ability to do other work, right? As long as you comply with the contract.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband was allowed to start a company while he worked at Amazon and seek investors. And that's what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And the only limitation was they couldn't also be investors in Amazon. And he was allowed to do business with entities doing business with Amazon, as long as his arrangement with that other entity wasn't substantially similar to Amazon's arrangement. So these are all legal terms, but basically he was allowed to do a bunch of other things. And the thing he did was start a company before he left and seek investors. Then he left and he started operating the company. And they came after him for both starting the company and seeking investment, and then the work he did after he left. And the crime that they said he committed was called private sector honest services fraud, which you've probably never heard of. And
a lot of people haven't heard that because it's such a strange thing. We had a governor go down here for honest services.
Yes. And in the public sphere, they use that statute to go after politicians who they say take bribes.
Mm-hmm.
I have an issue even with the statute in the public sector, because we have legalized bribery with lobbying. It's like, what's the line? I don't know. It's very like lobbying is literally legalized bribery. It's like,
sure, that's what it is. You're talking and taking somebody out to try to get something to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in the private
in return for something.
Right. And in the private sector, they use it to go after employees of private companies who they say deprive the company of its honest services. Honest services is not defined by the law. So it's like, what does it mean? And I think in the way it operates today, which I think is incredibly problematic, is the prosecutors, when they use it, which is pretty rarely, they like go to the company and they look at the company policies or the employment contracts or whatever to define that company's honest services.
Mm-hmm.
The issue you end up with is then like something that could be considered within the scope of employment at Amazon could be outside of what you're allowed to do at Netflix. So
sure. It's different. It's different company.
And that the criminal law
Yeah.
is not supposed to work that way, where like something is a crime if you do it here, but not if you do it there. We're supposed to have a uniform criminal law. So it's
that's the idea. That's the ideal, right?
The dream.
And then everything gets gray. I'm curious up until the point that your house gets raided and they do all this crazy, scary stuff. Were things pretty good with, Amazon and your husband? And because I know you guys were living a great life in Seattle and living your best life.
Yeah. And we had worked, I was 40 and my husband was 41. We had 4 little kids under the age of 6 that we'd had one after the other. I was running my startup, which had gone from an idea to 140 employees in 3 years. And my husband had taken this incredible expertise he had built in the data center development world and started a company, and he was just killing it. And it was amazing, and we didn't know all these things were happening behind the scenes. But to your question about whether things were okay with Amazon, I mean, my husband was pitching deals to Amazon, negotiating with them. They knew he had his own company working in data development. Like they were fully aware.
So the crazy email that goes to that I don't know how much of this stuff when you read this stuff, if it's real or not real, but there's supposedly an email that goes directly to Jeff Bezos. How does that, I mean,
there's still some things I don't really know how they happened, but the way that all of this started is that a man my husband had never met or heard of named Danny Mulcahy, who worked for a real estate developer in Colorado, emailed Jeff Bezos. And he said, would you care to know about a couple of your employees who have taken like $50 million in kickbacks?
Yeah. I
would like to have $50 million.
Oh, yeah. For sure.
And he addressed it like Mr. Bezos, like BEZO 'S. Sorry. And this man had worked for Danny had worked for a real estate developer named Brian Watson, who built data centers that Amazon leased. And it turns out, years later, finding all this out, that Danny had recently left Northstar. He had sought investors that were Brian's investors. He was taking them for his own company. He'd started a company. And, later he was deposed in civil litigation, and he said that he wrote the email based on water cooler talk, and he had no knowledge of any of this happening.
Wow. Well, when you guys had the knock on the door, can you kind of walk us through that? Because that's everybody's nightmare.
Yeah.
I think everybody's nightmare is you get a knock on the door at 6 or 5 in the morning, and you've got your kids with you, and these people look like maybe they're not there to help.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind, Amy, and what actually happened?
It's so funny because, you think for us that day was April 2nd, 2020, and it was one of those moments where you lived a life before and a life after, and in an instant, in 10 seconds.
In an instant.
And I will say, as I explained, my husband was building his company. I was building my company. I had no idea that, in the 6 weeks leading up to that knock, armies of lawyers were meeting, and Amazon was flying to the DOJ in DC and saying he committed a crime, and they were looking at our bank accounts and all of this stuff. No idea, which makes you feel foolish that there's a battle being prepared against you and you just have no idea. It was April 2nd, 2020. So it's, 2 weeks into the shutdowns, and it was around 6:45 in the morning. So it was still dark out in Seattle, and we had a glass door in the front of our house. And there was a knock, and I was like, who's knocking on our door this early? And I went to the door, and I had my baby on my hip in her diaper. And I saw 2 people standing at the door, and I kind of shrugged. And in my mind, I was like, is this a public health emergency? Is it outbreak, right? I don't know what I thought. And I kind of shrugged at them, and then they told me who they were because they flashed their badges. And I was like, what is this? And I opened the door, and they said they wanted to talk to my husband. And so I yelled for Carl, who was upstairs, and he came down, and I looked at him square in the eye because I am a lawyer. And I said, you cannot talk to these people without a lawyer. Mm-hmm. And I will tell all of you, so many people are afraid to say, I can't talk to you without a lawyer to law enforcement.
Almost like they're embarrassed that they're not being helpful.
Yes. And they think that if I say I need a lawyer, someone's going to think I did something wrong.
Right.
No, they're going to think you're smart. The FBI tries to talk to you and surprise you without a lawyer because they don't want you to have a lawyer. And it's the same reason when Amazon spends tens of millions of dollars on anti-union people. And I'm like, they don't want you to have a union. Think about it, right? A union,
right?
Right? The FBI does things a certain way because they don't want you to have a lawyer because they know you will be protected.
It's what I mean. It's almost like what you just said there. When somebody from law enforcement is asking you questions and you don't, it's almost like going to trial in a courtroom and saying you're going to represent yourself. That's how stacked that is against you when you're answering questions in a situation, because you have no idea where they're going. You don't know what their motives are. You don't have your clue. And for those listening, watching, please, if you get in any situation where you're in a situation where somebody's asking you questions and they're the law enforcement, your only move is to say, I need to talk to my attorney.
I mean, my little children know they are not to talk to the police or the FBI without a lawyer. It is. Yeah. I think it's an American constitutional lesson that every child needs to learn. And the other thing, and I didn't think about this ever before I started dealing with the FBI, but police wear body cams in all interactions. They're filmed and audio recorded. It's a big deal. It's really important. And we all agree on that. The FBI, however, which are a federal police force, and even though we walk around with phones in our pockets, they don't record things. They record, I think, custodial interviews, but they do not have to record their conversation.
I guarantee you that, 99% of the people actually don't know that. And there's a reason why that is that way, that by them not recording, they can say that you said things, that they heard things. And there is also a charge that can come against that as lying to the FBI. And there's people who get prison time for that. If there was a recording, you could obviously go back to the recording and say, no, this is what was said, and this is how it.
And I will tell you, if you feel so compelled to talk to these people that if you refuse to get a lawyer, you should record it.
Right.
You have a right to.
Right.
So if you're going to talk to them about a lawyer, record it. But what they do is and I didn't know this at the time, and I didn't know any of this, and I am a lawyer, but after their conversation with you at some point, maybe that day, maybe in a week, maybe in a month, they take their notes their recollection and they write what's called a 302 memo of what you said. And like you said, if you dispute what they say, do you think the jury is going to believe you or the FBI? They're going to believe the FBI. So anyway, my husband did not talk to them, but they gave him a few letters. And one letter was a subpoena for documents. One letter was correspondence telling him that he was the target of a federal criminal investigation being run out of the Eastern District of Virginia, so thousands of miles from where we lived, related to Amazon real estate. And finally, a third letter that told us they intended to seize certain of his bank accounts. Now, at that moment in time, I had never heard of civil forfeiture. And I don't know if everyone listening has, but in civil forfeiture, it's so interesting. It's such a legal fiction because civil forfeiture is used for criminal allegations, but because it's not about a human being, it's about the house they took or the bank account. Your house and your bank account don't have due process. So eventually the government had to file a civil lawsuit against our money. And then it's up to us to fight the civil lawsuit against our bank accounts to get it back.
Unbelievable.
So, and like the repercussions of it for us were that we made it to like October. And then I looked at my husband. I was looking at our money and I looked at my husband and I was like, we need to sell our house right now. And I just didn't think about it. I was like, we're doing it. And and that's
you guys had to survive.
Yeah, it's the grace of people, and this is like during COVID, right? Like the world is shut down, but the grace of people, I called my friend who'd helped us buy the house and she came over and I explained the situation to her. We took a walk and I was like, I can't deal with this. Like, I can't do it. I can't deal with it. And she's like, I've got it. And she did everything. And it might seem like something small, but that was like life-saving at the moment. And then I was like, well, where are we going with our family of 6? And my dad had just had a kidney transplant in Ohio. And so we couldn't even really go to my parents in Ohio because we couldn't see my parents. We couldn't stay with them because my dad was so immunocompromised with between COVID and the transplant. And my husband's father lived in Honolulu and I'm close to him. And I called him and I said, are there any, can we come stay with you? And he said, yes. And I found preschools for the girls and a kindergarten. And so we put all of our stuff in storage, packed the kids into our minivan, drove to my sister's house in San Francisco, stayed there for a month. And then all 6 of us in a room. And then we flew to Honolulu and we lived there for a year.
Wow.
Yeah. I felt like we were fugitives, but I also needed to be out of our house because after they took the money, then they raided our house. The FBI raided our house, and that was a horrifying experience. And again, this is all over alleged violations of an employment contract, which are
I guess that's what kind of blows my mind, Amy, is that you would think this was some international drug trafficking scheme where we've got people with hostages in the basement.
I know.
And we're talking about Amazon is going after 3 or 4 people because they think that they might have been not gotten as much money as they should have gotten on a transaction.
Correct.
Which this whole real estate thing they kept those leases and nobody was hurt and all those things that happened.
Oh, and
we can go into, but and that's why I think the judge was like, well, there's no harm here. There's no, where are we talking about people were put into a disadvantage? But when this was going on, the kids being the ages they are, what are they thinking?
I've talked to them a lot about it. Obviously now they have a lot more insight because now they're 10, 8, 7, and 5. The 5-year-old doesn't know anything, but except she thinks Jeff Bezos is a bad man.
Right.
But my 10-year-old, knows a lot more. And I asked them because when the FBI raided our house, it was again, 6:45 in the morning and there was a banging on the door this time. And it was 4 agents in their navy blue FBI jackets. And at the time, we thought my husband was being arrested because another tool that they have, as you know, is if they want you to plead guilty and you won't plead guilty, when they indict you, they will not let you self-surrender. They will come do a show of force at your house and drag you out in front of your kids. I know many people this has happened to.
Mm-hmm.
now in this world. So we thought they were there to arrest my husband because they were saying they were going to indict him. And so we just wanted it to happen as quickly as possible because I didn't want it to be a memory for the girls. So I opened the door, and then the agents told us they were there for a search warrant. And my husband and I were both like, what? Because like his lawyers had been meeting with the DOJ. And so like, obviously we had lots of attorney-client privilege stuff in the house, which they took. They took memos on law firm letterhead.
I saw you mention that. Did you, I mean, obviously you didn't know that at the time.
Well, I knew it. I knew when they took it because.
Oh, you did know that they took it.
Oh yeah, because I knew what was on the desk. And so like they actually, when the 4 FBI agents came, it's funny, my husband always laughs about it because he's like, you started screaming at them. And I'm like, I did. Like, I don't remember. But the FBI agent in charge, he said to me, he goes, I'm going to let you leave with your daughters. And I was like, what? I was like, is this a real search warrant? You know, because I was just like, what is happening? And he said, yes, but when you go into the house to take them out, do not take anything. You've already made a bad decision. And I was like, what? And I looked at him and he goes, I sent a wire to pay Carl's lawyers. And he said that was a bad decision. And then I looked at him and I guess I just lost it. And I was like, you are not allowed to be talking to me. We are represented. Like, you know better than this. But then Carl just like was like, Amy, leave. And I got the kids. They were in diapers, 6:45 a.m. in Seattle. I throw them in the minivan with our dog. And I went over to my best friend's house. And we were there for, a half hour. The search warrant was a half hour. It was all a show of force. They took my husband's laptop and his phone. And I think they did it because they wanted to see if he was communicating with the other targets to try to get him on that, like another pressure point. Right. And they took like law firm memos on letterhead. And I knew they took that. And I told his lawyers right away, and we sent a letter to the DOJ telling them they took it. And the DOJ's response was, you will not dictate our investigation. Mm-hmm. We'll reach out to you when and if we need to. They don't care.
No.
So, but after the FBI raid, I'd lived such a lucky, wonderful life and worked really hard, but never had real trauma. And of course, so many worse things happen to people than what my family's been through. And I would never equate what we've been through to losing someone or, any of those things. But for me, that FBI raid changed me psychologically because I felt like I couldn't keep my kids safe. And I didn't feel safe in my home anymore. And then I was convinced they were going to come back and arrest Carl.
The whole feeling of being out of control.
Yeah. I mean,
not having any control. Right.
And so what I started to do, and looking back and I'm like, this is wild, but I started getting my kids up at 6 or 5:45, getting them dressed and putting them in the car with Carl. And we would put our baby monitor in our upstairs window facing the street. And it was like, you would transmit to my cell phone if we were close. So we put the kids in the car and we would leave. And we took them all over Puget Sound on adventures to parks in the rain and the sun, wherever, get donuts. We'd be gone for like 3 hours. Cause to me, that was the window, right? Like if they were going to come back.
Sure.
And then as we drive back, we'd, get a street away and I'd connect my phone to the baby camera to see if they were there. And like, what a way to live. I mean, we did that.
So, I mean, it's like you almost feel that fugitive feel.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to get into what happens next because you guys actually get on a streak of starting to get wins in this thing, which I think is encouraging for people who are listening, that this can actually happen if you fight and you don't give up.
Yeah.
And that's encouraging. But anyway, I want to recognize the discoverability company. Do you like the way you show up online? Many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation on Google. There is hope. It's called Discoverability Company. And it can help you whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story, or even you're just trying to position yourself a little better against businesses and competition. Discoverability can also help with how you're portrayed on new AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more about Discoverability Company, they're allowing a do-it-yourself CEO option, a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with coupon code Nightmare Success. I also want to recognize that Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group, the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who can help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Mondays, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. For more information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, Amy, I mean, your world gets kind of crazy. You feel like you're a fugitive. You feel like the world's out of control. Your mom says it's time to get up. And then you start fighting and advocating and become a real powerful voice, which had to make you feel kind of different, I would think. Just kind of take some of that power back, take your story back and throw it out there in the world and get feedback too, good feedback.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. It's like for me, I'd had a company, I had 140 employees before COVID, and I did a lot on social media. And so when this first happened and I'm kind of gone from social media, that felt very weird for me. And then the accusations were made very public and it impacted my career. And I had to deal with that. And I actually had to leave my company to take a job at a big tech company for money because we needed the money.
When you say it impacted your career, like what were the different mechanisms that happened?
Well, I got this job with a big tech company and it was $1 million a year of compensation. And I was like, I've saved my family. I've done it. Like I'm going to be able to pay for our kids and give them a childhood and pay for Carl's criminal trial.
Yeah.
Those are, the two big things. And it was a remote job. And the week they wanted me to start was my kids' spring break in Hawaii. And I was like, I don't have childcare. I can't start that week. They're like, we need you to for X, Y, and Z reason. But I was going to do one call and it was on a Friday. And we were supposed to talk about the tech company acquiring my startup. I get on the call and it's not just my boss, but it's also two people I don't know. And I've run companies and I was like, and my boss was like, we are terminating you. And I was like, why? And he said, well, we just learned of, what's going on with your family and you didn't disclose it. And I said, well, disclose what? And he's like, well, what you're going through. And I was like, well, you're not legally allowed to ask me if I'm married during the interview process. So what did you want me to disclose? Like no one's charged. I'm not accused of anything. I'm not charged of a crime. And he just said, I'm going to hand this over to the lawyer. And then he got off the Zoom and that was that. And after that happened, I had not spoken on social media about what my family was going through. I'd been abandoned by a lot of the Seattle tech community because Amazon. And after that, I was like, you know what, whether I'm quiet or loud, like this is impacting me. And I would rather be loud and defend my husband. And we know what he did. We're not afraid of saying anything publicly. And by that point, my husband had chosen the lawyer he rode the distance with, who was a friend I'd had for 20 years, who knew me well and trusted me. And he's like, you're smart. Just be smart about it. Whatever. I don't want to be involved in it, but just, don't say anything stupid. And I started saying things on social media and talking about it. And of course, there's some people who are like, you shouldn't say anything. Your husband's obviously guilty. But I know a lot about telling a story and being consistent. And it was interesting, and I would really recommend this kind of tactic because what I was able to do through using social media was see what resonated with people in terms of what had happened, right? And in Amazon's allegations and what people understood and they didn't. And it also, it made me feel so much better. I had felt silenced and alone. And that's what they want you to do, is they want you to feel isolated and alone and ashamed. And I didn't feel ashamed, but I felt isolated and alone. And being able to talk made me feel not that way. And then eventually I had been on Instagram, I was 40, TikTok seemed like a dancing app, but people kept saying to me, try TikTok. So one day I just made a TikTok and it just started to take off. And I now have 250,000 followers on TikTok that really just listen to this pretty legally intricate story.
Yeah.
They've listened for years. And And then the other thing that happened with it is like, it made Amazon so mad.
I bet.
And I was like, I'm over the target. If they're pissed, they're scared. They know I'm telling the truth.
And it's going out to everybody.
And they can't control it. Like, they can control the media, Amazon can, and they do, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist when I say that. Like, the media is for profit, and Amazon is the largest buyer of ads in the world. Like, nobody, Jeff Bezos in many ways controls the news we hear, the media we watch with Amazon, like all of it, right? Like, it's wild. But Amazon's lawyers actually sent me a letter telling me that if I didn't shut down my TikTok, they were going to tell the Department of Justice that I was witness tampering. And one of the things I also said is, one of the things I needed to do was stop naming the lawyers who were doing this to my husband. And at that point, it was not just the DOJ investigation that Amazon was stoking. There was a civil lawsuit. And one of the things that I think is so important in talking about criminal legal reform is that we are not battling an institution. An institution can actually do nothing to us, right? We are battling people. We are battling the people that work at these institutions, that behave badly, that take advantage of statutes. And they have names, and they need to be named because you've been named, right? And so and I was a lawyer at a big law firm, and I could say no to cases. And so the lawyers at Gibson Dunn, the law firm that had done this to my husband, I know their names, and they are the people that I need to talk to, right? And so I talk about them on social media.
Right.
And I think that we need to do that all over. When you just kind of in anything, I think one of the greatest cons that the owners, the big corporations, the big institutions have pulled in America is that we blame them. We're like, Amazon did this. Amazon's a logo, right? People at Amazon did
There's
this.
people in Amazon, right?
And you have to make it personal for everybody for there to be change.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. And I'm not saying don't ever dox someone, don't ever harass someone, don't ever threaten someone, but identify the people that are making the choices that you think are wrong, that are impacting you.
Well, and I think your point is so well taken too. And one of the problems within the structure of those organizations, we talked about this earlier, Amy, is that like Matthew Burke, who was on your case, and then he was on the January 6th case with Jack Smith. He did some things that he was asked to leave that case because of how his actions that he took. Yeah. And then he got promoted to a bigger situation. And time again, it seems like that's what happens within that system is that somebody can get scolded. Things can be overturned. A Supreme Court can go 9-0. Yeah. But then you find these people in bigger positions. And I think that's one of the things that when we're talking about people are promoting people that are doing things that should be reprimanded and demoted, not promoted. And that's a huge problem within the system. And it's gone on for decades.
Well, I think so much of it is, I think that federal prosecutors, particularly, which is the world that I've come to know a little bit, they look at it as a learning experience, or we're going to test the bounds of this law, or we're going to get you some trial practice, or and it's not, that's not this. This is people's freedom.
It's somebody's life.
The most precious thing we have, right?
Right.
And so if they screw up a trial, or they, the current U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Virginia, Jessica Aber, she, along with Jack Smith, prosecuted Governor Bob McDonnell in Virginia, convicted him, and the Supreme Court overturned it 9-0 unanimously. And she'd been a line prosecutor at that time, and eventually then was appointed U.S. attorney. Why? When her judgment was to go after a governor of an American state, and something the Supreme Court said was so bad, we all agree. They don't agree on anything. We all agree this should be overturned. I mean, they destroyed Bob McDonnell's life.
Sure.
And if you dive into the story, they used all the prosecutorial tools. They threatened to indict his children. They did indict his wife. I mean, it's just
indicted his wife. Exactly.
Right, it's crazy. It's just, it's horrible.
Really ugly.
And I think it's, and she did it with Jack Smith, and then they're at the top of the food chain at DOJ. Whereas if you worked at a company and had those kind of outcomes, you would be fired.
Right. It'd be different. Right. And it would be different because there's principled, you can't stand for that. All those different things that go on. Amy, I'm interested in the fact that when you started and they threatened you with saying, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. It's witness tamper. It could be possible. Don't name names. What did you think?
I mean,
Because that's gutsy, by the way.
well, I mean, at that point, it was like, we're in it, right? Like, we made our decisions. Like, and they'd also, like, the prosecutors, like, lightly threatened me at one point with tax fraud. But our CPA, who was subpoenaed, was like, I know everything that these guys have done. They're good. Like, answer the subpoena, like, went to bat for us. Mm-hmm. I mean, they subpoenaed our nanny, who we paid over the table with taxes. Thank God. Pay your nanny over the table if you have a nanny. And like, my husband and I both worked full time, so we had childcare. But they subpoenaed our nanny, like our poor nanny. You know, it's just, obviously she wasn't working for us anymore because we couldn't afford that, but it was horrifying. But anyway, at this point, when they threatened me, it was February of 2022. And I mean, I was kind of like, you can't tell me to shut down my TikTok. And I am not saying anything that is secret, that is wrong. I'm telling the truth. And I felt okay with it. You know, I was like, okay. And I also knew that they clearly didn't want me to. And I think when you're fighting $1 trillion company, like, you're not going to outspend them, right? You only have a few options. And I figured out pretty quickly that, like, one of the ways to fight Amazon was to just flood it with sunlight, because they don't want you to. And they
didn't want that, right?
You know, I figure I've learned that, you know, when they did all the things they did, this bombastic investigation, they just expected everybody to fold and that there wouldn't be a fight. They had no plan B. I mean, they have just flailed for years and I think they've spent over $100 million on lawyers, which is nuts, right?
Oh my God.
They've just flailed for years. I don't know what the hell their plan is even now. And so I was like, just keep fighting, just keep doing it. Don't give up. Don't stop.
When did you get your first good piece of news? Like, how long, how far into it were you?
Eventually I realized, like, every month my husband wasn't indicted was a piece of good news, right? Like, start living like that, like, great. Because when you get a target,
because early on, the other two guys had cut plea deals, right?
So the Amazon's main target, he fought, he's still fighting. He's suing everybody now, which is amazing. He's suing Amazon and he's suing everybody. And then my husband's, one of the other main targets, Casey Kirshner, he never pled. He fought the whole way through too. But then 4 guys pled guilty, and they had their pleas vacated. But some people, but we didn't know they pled guilty, right? Like, we had no idea. This was a black box to us. These weren't people my husband, one of them he didn't even know, you know, like, but the first piece of good news, actually, we did something that was sort of unconventional. In the fall of 2020, so like 6 months into this investigation, we decided to sue Amazon, because Amazon had sued my husband in Virginia, and my husband's employment contract with Amazon said they had to sue him in Washington State. And I had been a lawyer in Washington State, so my old boss did the lawsuit along with my husband's father. So we didn't have to, pay my husband's father. And we sued Amazon for breach of contract.
Yeah, you took the offense.
We took the offense, which was unexpected. And I think they were very surprised by it. But part of it was like, I wanted this to be about the employment contract, because it was, right? If you give someone an employment contract, and my husband's employment contract wasn't silent, it explicitly authorized him to do the thing that Amazon was complaining about, like in plain language. So we sued them, and then we immediately, when we sued them, moved for partial summary judgment, which usually comes like at the end of discovery. But it was like this kind of like this ninja, like, we're just doing this. We want a judgment. And we won. Amazon tried to delay the hearing, but we won. And that was in February of 2021. So that was the first piece of like really good news. Like, okay, we've got a win on the books.
Yeah.
And that felt good. But then it wasn't really until the end of 2021 that we really started winning. And when we started winning, it was great, but it was also like, why won't they quit? Why won't they quit? What's going to make them quit? And I had this hope. I was like, well, when this happens, they'll quit. When this happens, they'll quit. Both Amazon and DOJ.
Well, I think one of the reasons why, and I'm just speculating, but it's strange how this thing went like directly to Jeff Bezos. Mm-hmm. He got a direct email that said, hey, you want to check this out? and he responded. And, you know, like you said, that company is so huge.
Yeah.
But it's almost like he was directly had some interest in this small case that didn't seem like it meant anything.
I mean, I think, well, there's a couple of things. I think he might have sent an email like, fix this, you know, which would be a Jeff Bezos email. And then he's a billionaire and people just do what he says, you know, like but the other piece of it, so this related to these real estate deals. And what the main target, Brian Watson, had built these data centers that Amazon leased. Brian Watson had a money partner. The money partner, along with Amazon, kicked Brian Watson out of his ownership stake of the leases. So Amazon's like renting these data centers and somehow kicks the owner out, the part owner. And so then the money partner gets all the ownership. So they get a windfall of hundreds of millions of dollars. Amazon didn't need to participate in this action at all, but they did. And the agreement that Brian Watson, the real estate developer, had with his money partner was the only way the money partner could kick Watson out was if he pled guilty or was convicted of a felony. They kicked him out the night before their first meeting with DOJ. I mean, these people did not try to hide what they were doing. And so once they'd done that, they had to get him convicted of a felony or they're liable for hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's why they won't give up. Right. Because Amazon has these data centers. They're making billions of dollars off of them. Yeah. Like, you know, they kept them. It's not that they didn't want them. And so I don't know what their plan is now that the DOJ investigation is over. Like, I don't know I don't know.
Let's talk about the DOJ investigation being over, because the judge walk us through what happened. So on what happened with the actual process of what the judge said and what it all meant and where you are now.
So, you know, Carl was never charged. So we never had a day in court on the criminal side. But eventually on this Amazon civil lawsuit, which turned out to be a great blessing, even though it didn't feel like it, Carl's lawyers and the other defendants who fought, the real estate developer and another man named Casey Kirshner, they filed for summary judgment, meaning we think we should dispose of this case before trial because of Amazon, there's no way they can prove it. So we filed for summary judgment, and we filed in January of 2023. And you waited, you know, when we were getting ready for the civil trial, it was scheduled for, I think, like the end of April of 2023. And you're just waiting and you're living your life. And then some really bad stuff happened. In February, I learned, because I'm obsessive and I was like surfing the docket, that people had pled guilty. And that terrified me. Sure. Because at that point, I kind of thought the DOJ investigation was like over, but it wasn't. And then this whole new round of like, oh my God, they're going to indict my husband. Now we've spent like all of our money on the civil trial. We're screwed. Like at how, you know, all like, and we're years into this. And now, and you having survived a long investigation, know, like when you're years into it to then have to go to that next stage. So they entered these pleas and I was like, oh my God. But because they entered these pleas, my husband's lawyers were then able to depose the guys who pled in the civil case. And they're like literally in the middle of a deposition, and the judge rules on the summary judgment motion. And like we won. I mean, it is super rare to win on summary judgment. It's hard. But the facts were so on our side, right? Like Amazon had said they've been harmed by $70 million, and then they hired a damages expert who refused to opine on whether Amazon was damaged because they weren't, because the evidence showed as to this real estate that they underpaid. Yeah. So it's like, and the judge was like, he was like, this is ridiculous, right? Like this is insane. Yeah. But most importantly, he said that my husband, the Amazon's employment contract, like said my husband could do X, Y, and Z, and authorized my husband to do the thing Amazon complained of. And that was so important because the plea agreements, the statements of fact from the guys who pled guilty, like said something completely different as to what my husband's employment agreements were. And these guys were pleading guilty to helping my husband break those agreements. So what I've heard, but anyway, in that moment, right? Like my husband was sitting in a deposition in Nashville. I was driving the girls home from school, and they got a break, and he called me. And he said, we just got the summary judgment back. And I was like, well, on to trial. He's like, we won.
Oh man, I can't imagine, Amy.
Like, everything? And he's flipping through it. He's like, there's one state law claim left, but the RICO, the unjust enrichment, the fraud, the employment contract. And I was like, and when he told me we won the employment contract, I was like, we're good. You know, like I was like, we can figure this out from here. But I just screamed. I still get chills talking about it because it was like, oh my God.
And you're just driving in the car?
With the kids, you know, and then I get home and I'm just like, and then I get it down, I'm reading it. And it's just crazy. It was so amazing. And the DOJ did not stop. The DOJ did not stop and say, okay, we're going to stop. They still said, we're going to move forward. And I'm going to curse now. I was like, what the fuck? Like, I mean, you're going to go to a jury and say that my husband should go to prison for violating his honest services to Amazon when a federal judge has said that he complied with his contract. So then we had to create a presentation for the DOJ to convince them one more time to not do this. Mm-hmm. And it was like, you know, a lot of people wouldn't do that because they would say, we're going to wait for the indictment and hold our chips close for the trial. Right. We collectively were like, screw it, like put it all on the table.
Let's all go forward. Yeah, know? Right now. We have the momentum.
A presentation for the end of May. They gave the presentation and we heard nothing. We did hear in July, DOJ dismissed the first two pleas. And that was a dismissal because those two pleas hadn't been entered. We never saw them. And we heard from one of the guys who's getting his pleas vacated from his attorney.
Which hardly ever happens, Amy. I don't want to just brush over that.
Never happens.
They vacated the pleas of these guys that did a plea bargain.
They said you can't go to prison.
Yeah. So, like so I mean, that doesn't happen. I mean, that's very, 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 very rare. And like that happened with both of those guys.
Yeah, I read an article when General Flynn was having his plea vacated. And the New York Times wrote an article where they talked to 7 former federal prosecutors, and not one of them could think of another time the DOJ had vacated a plea. And
there it is.
Like, wow.
Yeah.
But they still never talked to us. But I heard from a lawyer of one of the other defendants who was having his plea vacated that the judge had emailed, it was the same judge in the criminal and civil, had emailed the prosecutors and the counsel for the defendant saying, you've seen my summary judgment order. What are you doing about these pleas and the statements of fact? Like, how are you going to correct them? Mm-hmm. And you, as you know, you can't like wildly change a legal theory. Well, technically you're not supposed to be able to like wildly change a legal theory. And so I think that's why they did it, but then they still didn't talk to us. So we're still living in this thinking Carl's going to be indicted. And that's so horrifying, right? Like we're still,
it's purgatory.
It's purgatory. And then finally in January of 2024, so just a year ago last week, my husband and I are sitting on the couch. It's like, I don't know, 8 p.m. at night. And we got a call and we were told from the lawyers and they said they're vacating the last 2 pleas. It's done. It's over. An assistant U.S. attorney named Russell Carlberg called the lawyers and said it was the right thing to do. They'd had a ton of meetings at DOJ about it. They'd tried to get it done before Christmas, but didn't. And it was over.
Wow, Amy. Wow. I mean, it's so unusual. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show for a lot of reasons, but you know, there's so many ways that this could have gone wrong. And there's so many things that you did that if you wouldn't have done, I'm not sure. I mean, I often ask myself in your case, what would have happened if you wouldn't have gotten up and you wouldn't have become a voice and you wouldn't have become a thorn in their side with, you know, all of these followers that are hearing not just about your case, you talk about just the system in general, introducing thoughts and facts of how things are. You know, I was having a conversation the other day they were talking about the grand jury, and they said, well, yeah, but you know, the guy, you know, that guy gets to present his side. I said, no. 99.9% of the people think a grand jury that the defense also presents. It's just the prosecution. So they wonder, like, how can you get an indictment so easily? Well, if you only present one side to a grand jury that's being seen by that the prosecutors are the white knights that are trying to protect everybody, and that other person's not in the room, of course you're going to get a lot of indictments because that's the way the system's set up.
Yeah.
If you set it up differently, then you allow the other side to present and see what the jury actually thinks. But
it's so dumb.
It's one of those things. What I think, Amy, is And I hope you keep doing everything you're doing because your voice is so clear. The clarity in how you bring the topics to the audience is so good to understand. Because a lot of times, you being an attorney, it's so easy to talk over people just because you've been taught that way, and you have been able to, and I think that's why you have the following you have. You create emotion of cause. And I think I don't know what would have happened if that part wouldn't have been in there in this particular case, because you brought so much light to the situation that all sides had to look and say, do we really want to go all the way with this?
Yeah, which is unfortunate that had to be part of the equation, but I'm sure it was, right?
Yeah.
Because, Jeff Bezos says at the Washington Post that democracy dies in the darkness, and he's right.
He does.
And so, yeah, I wonder about a lot of things. Like, one of the biggest things, I don't think I've ever really talked about this, but the first judge on the civil case, who I think would have probably handled the pleas, was a guy named Liam O'Grady. And in the civil case at the beginning, I mean, he was just ruling for Amazon on everything. And to the point, like, he issued a $21 million injunction against Brian Watson without an evidentiary hearing.
Wow.
Like, just based on what Amazon said, which is insane. And I read a Wall Street Journal article about judicial conflicts of interest. And I clicked on the source material and looked at Liam O'Grady. And in his last disclosure, he owned an awful lot of Amazon stock, which is just against the rules. And he's overseeing a conflict of interest case, right? But so I reached out to the Wall Street Journal reporter on Twitter. I just DM'd him and said, hey, I read your article. It was really interesting. Like, we're going through this. I would love for you to try to figure out if this judge still owns the stock. He called the judge, and the judge said he still owned Amazon stock. And then he said he wasn't recusing. And then, which
is their choice, by the way.
Their choice. And then the Wall Street Journal put it on the front page of the paper. And then he recused. And like, that's that, you know what I mean? It's like, it's unfortunate, right? Like, it's unfortunate. And he obviously,
it happens a lot too. I mean, I had Carlos Watson on the show.
He got screwed
a few episodes ago, and his judge had, he was investigating. He's one of the richest federal judges on the bench. And for the companies that were the victims of the case, he had stock in and didn't recuse himself, regardless of what everybody thinks about the case or Carlos Watson. I'm a very big supporter of Carlos and his cause, but that's not right. I mean, there shouldn't be that conflict in the case, because then that creates questions, and that shouldn't be part of our system. But it happens a lot.
I completely agree with you. It's kind of like people need to understand that we need, like, the equal application of rules and laws and the fairest shake for anyone accused of a crime. 4 of the 10 Bill of Rights deal with accused people and their rights. Right. Our founding fathers were all accused criminals, right? And they cared so deeply that you would have a right to a jury trial, which we really don't in this country. Right. If you exercise your right to a jury trial, if you can afford it, or you have a public defender, you face a lengthier prison sentence if you lose, which I believe is wholly unconstitutional. There should be no punishment for exercising your constitutional right. And people are like, well, the system would collapse if everybody went to trial. And I'm like, well, then perhaps we should think about how many people we're putting in prison for nonviolent issues that could be corporate. It's like, we put more people in prison than anyone in the world. And it's horrifying and it's terrible. And then we punish people for the rest of their lives, even after they've served their sentence. And it's hard to get people to rally around it, we think. But I have this theory, right? Because so many millions of Americans are justice impacted, whether they are or their family members. Yeah. It could actually be a very winning issue.
I think one of the biggest issues on that, Amy, and I'm very interested in that particular thing. There's 26 million, ex-felons. There's 70 million that have records. Then you've got all the people that are affected around the family. The biggest problem I see with the people, justice involved, justice impacted people is that everybody kind of works in silos. There's people doing good things over here, say in Kentucky, and then there's some people doing some good things over here in Michigan. But the something needs to be put across, like an Amazon of voices of the umbrella on the top, so that it speaks with a voice that can actually create change. And there's a lot of different people that have created big change, like Jay Jordan created big change in California with expungement and those type of things. But it's one of those things that if we could bridge everything instead of silo everything, the voice would be so much more powerful and heard. And question is how does that happen?
Well, it's interesting because, I was a lifelong Democrat. And not just a voter. Like, I was a National Finance Committee for Obama, all these things. And I will tell you that I am very excited about Kash Patel leading the FBI. And one of the reasons is he's a former federal public defender. And we've never had a former federal public defender lead the FBI. And he has seen he's also a federal prosecutor, but he's seen the other side of it. He's seen how it works. There's no glory to being a federal public defender. It is a hard job and an underpaid job. And he's seen both sides. And I believe that if anybody can reform the DOJ and maybe change some of the practices, it can be him. And a lot of Democrats are like, "What are you talking about?" And I'm like, just give it a chance, right? And he doesn't come from the, what would you call it? Like the white collar industrial complex.
Right.
He never went to work at a big white shoe law firm. So he doesn't care, which is like the danger of him to sustain.
That's why people are scared of him. Sure.
Which is why I think the establishment rejects him. So, but I think he could bring about some reform and some change. There's so many simple things, right? I think about DOJ press conferences, which are ridiculous, right? Like you mentioned, if you speak publicly, anything you say can be used against you. But the DOJ holds a press conference to announce they're accusing you of something. It's the same as saying, I'm going to hold a press conference and announce that I'm going to plan a dinner party. You know what I mean? No, sure, if you win at trial, have a press conference, but they announce the indictments and then they put a little thing at the end, you're innocent until proven guilty.
Right.
No.
We just recently had the thing with Jack Smith saying that he had enough evidence to get a conviction. Well, that's really actually the jury's responsibility for that. But it's just out there. It's just said. The question is, we talk about poisoning the jury pool and all those type of things that we, being the defendant, can do. But the power of the press and the voice of the prosecutor is so powerful.
It's so powerful. And I just part of what I've struggled with a lot is how these prosecutors think this is fair or think they're doing justice, because how could you, right? How could you really think that when you're oh, here's this family that Amazon wants to accuse of a crime. I'm going to take their money so they can't feed their kids. I'm going to destroy them publicly. I'm going to raid their home and terrify them. And best of luck, guys. I mean, what? And they said they did horrifying things. When they seized all of our money, our lawyers asked if we could have some back for groceries. And the one of the attorneys, assistant U.S. attorney named Samantha Bateman, who was a mom, said to our attorneys, they can have money to feed their kids if he pleads guilty.
If he pleads guilty. Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember my mother saying, do they care if your kids starve? And I said, I think they want them to. And at that moment, for a long time, I was I do not like America anymore. But then I realized, I love this country.
Yeah.
I think I love it more than they do.
Do you think, Amy, that we're at a point where the pendulum could swing back towards the middle to where we're not so far into, Los Angeles Dodgers against your softball team?
I really hope so. I think if there was ever a moment, it would be now. We have a president who is a felon. He is just as impacted.
He's, as of January 10th, a convicted felon.
He's just as impacted. And I hope so. I don't think we know, right? I mean,
I think my feeling is that there has probably been not a time in my life, I'm 58, there's not been a time in my life where I've seen more people question, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Where it's really not ever been a question. It's just, this is our system.
Mm-hmm.
You get indicted. Most people think indicted means convicted.
Yep.
There's just a system that if you get caught in it, then you did something wrong, and there's really nothing wrong with the system. It's just, you shouldn't be in the system. I think right now that we're at a point where the FBI, the Department of Justice, the overall atmosphere of the media that gives it fuel all of that is somewhat being questioned. I don't know what that all means. I don't know, because I mean, you go back to the beginnings at times, like of the FBI, the building's named after J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, he blackmailed everybody in Washington and in the country, and movie stars and presidents, and we named the building after him. So this isn't something we're talking about that just happened a few years ago. This has been something that has been a power center for a long, long time with there's been good actors and bad actors, but in general, we're trying to create justice. How do we create that with as many people as we can?
I mean, the FBI has been a corrupt institution since its founding. And, are there amazing people in the FBI? There are.
Sure.
And do they do important work? They do.
Yes.
However, it is an institution that is built to abuse the rights of Americans. It's a feature of the system, not the bug. So we have to fix it. And, I think Trump, I was sort of surprised that he nominated Cash, but thrilled. Because if anybody would do it, it would be him. And there's also, I know pretty well a group of FBI agents that call themselves the Suspendables who've left the FBI during the last administration. And they're very powerful voices for change. And I'm hoping they'll be involved in the reform. And I hope to be, I'm in touch with lots of people and talk to people. Like I want to go in and
you've got a lot of important followers.
But I am. So, I'm going to be very loud as I can. I'm not afraid at all, especially now the statute of limitations is over. So, it's like, because a lot of this is like, if you survive it, you get quiet and keep going because everyone's like, you survived, just keep going.
Yeah. Don't let it,
like my husband and I are going to put our head down. Like we're building companies, we're like, we're going to be out there again. And so I would rather, and I think part of it too, and part of the reason one of the other reasons I went on social media is because we have these 4 girls and they were little and they're not going to remember this as it happened, but they're going to learn about it.
Well, and I got to tell you, I mean, what a role model you've been for handling a crisis, being resilient. And I know they're at a young age now, but this stuff is evergreen out there and they'll see how their mom reacted. And I think that means a lot.
Well, I just, at the beginning, I didn't know how it was going to end.
Yeah.
And I still cry when I think about this, but if he had been charged and if he had gone to prison, I wanted them to know that I tried.
We fought. Yeah.
So,
what do you think's your biggest takeaway through all of it?
Oh my God. I think my biggest takeaway is that no matter how stacked the odds are against you, don't count yourself out.
That's good.
Because
don't give up.
It's pretty easy to count yourself out.
Oh,
right?
For sure. I mean, for a lot of people that are on this show, they see the United States of America versus their name. They're not used to seeing that. I had Jeremy Harrell on here a few episodes ago, and he was a veteran of Iraq War, and he created this incredible thing called the Veterans Club that changes people's lives through PTSD, and they come against him for $100,000 over 13 years because they said that he was creating this company, so he really wasn't disabled, even though 5 doctors had created him or had diagnosed him as disabled.
Like, what are we doing?
From PTSD, and they just said, go ahead and live your life. It's not fixable. And he becomes an expert in the PTSD field, and they take him down. And I think I look at this, and he's close to Senator Rand Paul, and I think that some of it people were kind of pushing him into the political world, and it could have been some of those ramifications, but I don't know. I just know that it's really strange that this guy was doing an awful lot of good nationally, and now he's got a 6-month prison sentence, and what a waste. But I know somebody like Jeremy will be a very powerful voice coming out because he's experienced the whole thing. He fought the case. And I think the judge felt bad that he was even sentencing him to time. They were asking for 10 years and he gave him 6 months, but,
Yeah.
and usually you get a penalty for going to trial. So that kind of tells you.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big thing, Amy. What you said is don't count yourself out, because most people count themselves out.
Yeah, they do. And then I think like, I realized like the only way we're going to end up with change is if we keep fighting.
Yeah.
Because, there are days where I'm kind of, like I would like to not be doing this, right? I would like to, because it's trauma, right? But
yeah.
But I'm going to keep doing it because I want to advocate for change, because they'll just keep doing this shit to people. And it's
I think what your trauma is, like you said, that you took your voice back, you got off the floor, and you took, you own your story and you're sharing it. But I think that, your vulnerability and your ability to share this is so powerful. And I really hope, Amy, that you continue to do it, because a lot of people like what you say. A lot of people believe in what you say. And the more you do it, I think the more change can happen. And I think it happened in this case. I really do. I think you were a big mover of it.
But I hope, and I really want to advocate for civil forfeiture reform. And I'm trying to meet with Senator Paul. I've been in touch with his office, and I know Senator Booker, who have the newest civil forfeiture reform bill up. But civil forfeiture primarily,
it's a big one.
It's a big one, and it primarily impacts people that don't look like me, and people who don't have the ability to go to court to fight. And you think about, like, let's use this example. Like, if you have a dime bag of weed in your car, they can take your car. And if you can't get to work, you can't take your kids places. Like, what do you do?
You're shut down.
It's the start of a spiral.
Right.
And so we need civil forfeiture reform. There are simple things we can do, take away the incentive, right? And so I really think like that is a big piece of it, is civil forfeiture reform. If I can somehow impact that in the world, like I've done something really, really important.
Yeah. Amy, and as people get a hold of you, I think you're Amy K. Nelson on all platforms, right?
Amy _K _
yeah, underscore. Yeah. Amy _K _ Nelson. Yeah. At Amy K. Nelson.
At everywhere. Hopefully still at TikTok. So.
No, I mean, I think 250,000 followers on TikTok. It's unbelievable. Speaking about being grateful of being here, I want to thank Homestead Financial for letting me use this whole podcast setup here. If you've got home mortgage needs, Greg Aftiev is your guy. If you're looking for a book out there, I've got one, Nightmare Success. Check it out. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Please like and share. And if you can, leave a review on Apple. It really helps the show. If you want to check me out on any more stuff about me, BrentCassity.com. I spell it wrong. It's with a TY, not a DY. I used to say to my people writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Amy Nelson, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Brent.
Nightmare Success, in and out. Amy, you know what's crazy is about 15 minutes into the thing, I hit the record thing on our on my Rodecaster Pro, but I didn't hit it on this. So I'm trying to figure out if